All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to welcome everyone to our TIG chat. We're excited to have Carolyn Hoessler with us today. She's going to be talking about AI. She's an evaluator, educator, and curricular designer in higher education with experience in accreditation, nationally disciplinary accreditation, learning outcome assessment, course evaluation design, and analysis. She teaches quantitative, qualitative, and data-driven solutions. We're excited to have her. We're going to turn it over to her. We'll be putting a few things in the chat, so please be on the lookout for links to complete. But Carolyn, please take it over.
Thank you so much, Kevin and Matt, Nidhi, and everyone who's been involved in setting up today's conversation. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I think one of the things that we go about with AI is we also realize that we don't want to lose the people. And today's a chance to have a conversation among us about what we want to keep, what's working, what's not working, what our concerns are around AI, and getting some of the updates on it. So this is an interactive session. So we're going to have an information about AI at the beginning, followed by a conversation supported by Mentimeter. So we have a Mentimeter survey style. So that means it's self-paced. So you're welcome to click on the link that's in the chat or go to menti.com and type in the number or use your QR code. And by joining, you get to answer some questions. It is self-paced. So click the next button or the next question just to proceed through. What we're going to be talking about is who is here, and that's in the Mentimeter. What is AI, AI's capabilities, limitations, what's emerging? And then we'll be going through things like student learning assessment. I'll give you some updates on the quantitative, qualitative, and survey design information as well, and we'll have discussion on the uses and concerns. So one of the first questions in the survey will be, what is your role? And also, what are some of the types of input or data that you are making use of? Followed by some of the concerns that you have for AI. So please take a moment to join the Mentimeter and start going through it. I'll have it open on my screen so I can get a sneak peek as we go through, and I'll give some intel as we go, and then we'll have a great conversation at the end. So for instance, we see people who are evaluators and directors and data analysts and strategic planners who are already inputted their role. So who am I? As mentioned, I've about 20 plus years in higher education. I have geeked out on things around cognitive science, AI, social psychology, statistics, education, and organizational leadership. And I've been basically involved in kind of the conversation around how AI is impacting both independent consultants as well as evaluation here in Canada. So when we think about Gen AI, a lot of people think about what it creates, and it is a thinking partner, a novice drafter, and an idea generator. So many of us have played with it and created everything from text images to presentations to have it go text to audio or even create videos and more. When we think about it, it does well this option generation or idea generation. It really summarizes, synthesizes, or gives layperson descriptions, and it does really good with norm-aligned typical output. And we'll talk a bit more about both the strengths of that and the limitations. As mentioned, it can be very convincing, but not always correct in statistical analysis. It's very good at writing code. Again, typical output, norm-aligned output. It can write reflections based on sample questions and bullet points. It can draft discussion posts, and most types of assignments actually it can handle pretty well. It's going to search and locate literature. Interestingly enough, PubMed just launched a connector in Claude, which is one of the many types of AI that are out there. And so you can actually have PubMed dataset connected into AI at this moment. It does hallucinate content still and it does invent some sources. We can think about plain language explanations it does well, developing chatbots. It creates its own robots, creates its own code, and it can review and revise marketing and online materials. It often can give like a second perspective or tell you what it sees in the materials that you've developed. Drafts meeting minutes, gives great transcription, and creates case studies and examples and develops survey questions. But it also can respond to surveys and it can and then also analyze surveys. So something that's developing is that right now is that humans when they complete a survey, they don't complete it in 5 seconds. Neither do AI anymore. So it actually will pace like a human and mimic human responses, and it will have archetypes, for example, of how it may respond. Some of the concerns are these hallucinations, so fictional or inaccurate responses, bias, misrepresentation, and wrong interpretation, data breaches, reuse, and privacy issues with that. some really strong IP or intellectual property ambiguity, and huge environmental impact that's becoming much more known in some of the court cases around it. How we interact with Gen AI, this keeps multiplying. So we have text-based chat windows. Most people have seen it, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot. We have also have embedded chat windows that pop up and try to be helpful. And we have embedded AI wizards like the Zoom companion that was mentioned. And then in addition to that, AI is now building its own, essentially what they call robots, but basically desktop-based apps, agents, and chatbots. So we're seeing a lot of AI get embedded in everything. One of the ways that Gen AI struggles is this kind of trying to get all three pieces of accuracy, efficiency, and privacy. So it doesn't do privacy well because it has to, in order to be efficient, connect into a cloud. It doesn't necessarily do accuracy well because sometimes it goes and gets information that is not relevant or goes to more typical or stereotypical information. And then that impacts efficiency because you have to go back and check. So those three things AI tends to struggle with. But we can understand why when we look at how Gen AI works. So if we look under the hood, and for those of you who like cars, this is kind of like popping open the hood of a car, taking a look inside. For those of you who think of cars as the thing you put your key in or hit start on and away it goes, that's how many people use AI. But when we look under the hood, what it is we type in our prompts or our samples or our requests into our devices. In the back end is instructions within that software, whether that's Copilot or Claude, for what to do with what we've just typed in. It connects into a large language module that's been developed through a lot of predictive testing, through millions of approximations. And oftentimes, the large data sets used is not vetted, it's the internet. So our algorithms receive our prompts, then use preset instructions and their large language model based on a large data set sourced from the internet and earlier instructions to approximate a best answer. And that best answer isn't always your best answer. And for each request, the AI restarts from scratch, which is why you probably experienced where you've asked it for a minor edit and it gives you an entirely new analysis, a new image, or a new output every single time. So why is AI doing the wrong thing? A is not a macro or a set of code that repeats a process. It always creates a new best guess, and different companies have different definitions of best. If you run the same query through multiple AI sources, you will actually get different answers. You run it through the same AI, like you run it through Copilot twice, you'll get a different answer both times. But the goal is to usually get us to like the responses. They want plausibility, not necessarily accuracy. So with that in mind, we really have to think about what's the nature of AI and why is it getting stuck. So AI impacts higher education because of how it works and how inherently it works. It's pervasive. It's now the new norm. Nearly every interface, constantly advertised in most social media. It's pervasive and the output's very plausible and convincing. We often see it pop up in places that we may not have expected people to be using it. It's very pleasing, it's easy to use, fun to use, and it very much seems fast. If you're asked to do a task, dropping into AI so much seems like, and going for a coffee, so much seems like an easier option. It's promoted, it's actually very much marketed. And if you use AI once, it actually self-promotes and says, hey, I can do this too for you. The other thing that's been interesting that we're seeing is it's promoted as time saving for the employee at the moment, or the student, or the staff, or the faculty member. But what we're probably seeing in the back end is it's starting to be advertised as budget saving. So in other words, you could hire RAI instead of hiring staff to do this task, graphic designers, and analysts, things like that. So we're starting to see a bit of the advertising around that, and that's where I'm concerned for us in evaluation. AI also has an inherent inaccuracy problem because it lacks consistency, because it always goes back and reruns the algorithms. It's going to be having a low, what's called reliability, and therefore it's going to have low validity. If you're not consistent, you can't constantly point to the same truth, if there's a truth. In terms of intellectual property and privacy, it's really nonchalant. It actually assumes you don't care unless you have legal agreements and technological steps that have been assured to try to protect your data. But for the most part, it's going to default to sharing it. It's going to default to reusing it. There's a couple exceptions like Claude and some of the settings in Copilot when it's attached to our institutions typically already has the legal agreements or technological steps there, but most AI doesn't. So when our students are using AI to run a draft of our assignments, guess where our assignments are going? It is not being protected unless they're using something that's been taken those extra steps. Attribution murkiness is another one that's coming up. This is the idea of whose work is it when you've used AI. We're seeing in grants now and articles having statements for people having to state how AI has been used. But this is going to start impacting higher education reputation. The same way some of the mass contract cheating scandals have impacted higher education. We're starting to wonder about, well, what does it look like when we can say at our university, 90% of our students are using AI on their assignments? How are we going to handle that brand and that consideration? So implications for accreditation, particularly learning outcome assessment and degree granting. So when we think of AI's impact on things like student participation and assessment, one of the new ones for AI is that you can create an AI bot that can sit in meetings and can interact and answer questions. So if you start to think about your students in a class when their cameras are not off, what does this look like if they're not physically in the space? Grading and outcome synthesis, surveys and reports, analysis and external evaluations, meeting minutes and decisions. AI is impacting all of those today, and it will continue to. At a larger scale, this gets us into questions around learning outcome assessment, program review. What's the purpose? What's the quality? How do we know what students are learning? Accreditation is in there as well. Decision making and degree granting reputation is going to be next, I believe. So one of the things we think about is how are we using it as evaluators? How are students using AI? How are our colleagues using AI? That could be faculty and staff. How AI institutions have it navigating AI, but how is it impacting their own decision making? So if they're sending out an alumni survey, is that alumni survey being completed by humans? And if it's being completed by humans, how do we know for sure? And then at a society level, how does society view higher education within the context of AI? So hopefully you get a chance to share some of that in the Mentimeter as well. Some of the things that are emerging are the idea of AI detectors. And most people have remembered the whole idea of when there was contract cheating and people kept using the same essays. We had things like turnitin.com and all these other ones to detect it. They always had flaws. This one magnifies the flaws because if AI creates new content every time, it does tend to the cliche and the norm typical, but it actually can't distinguish between a student writing a cliched sentence and an AI writing a cliched sentence. So they're not defendable results. So if we think of places where AI is done with like a proof system and a demonstrated evidence system, AI detectors don't count. They can't detect at the level of that certainty. We now have a new software that's coming out that's claiming to complete student courses. Companion AI Einstein was the one that kind of shocked everybody at the beginning of the year. Funny enough, it wasn't blocked because of what it does. It was blocked because it had a naming copyright issue by calling it Einstein. So easily change the name, resubmit out the same software. We may run into the same issues. AI is going to be self-paces now. It completes surveys, quizzes, assignments at the rate of a human. So you can no longer look at it and say, oh, it must have been a computer because it took 5 seconds to complete. So we no longer have those shortcuts to kind of clean up our data. Policies have very limited reach. Telling people they shouldn't use it doesn't tend to work ever. And having things like copyright and IP, it's going into the desktop assistance and the uploads, whether we ask for people to not do it or to do it. Lastly, attribution statements I mentioned are coming out for assignments, thesis, articles, grants. Are they going to come out soon for academic merit? Probably. And how about degrees? When a student completes, do they have to say how much of their degree did they do with AI? What's it going to look like when we have to consider some of that? All throughout of it, I like to come back to three kind of things. Practical, what is AI capable of here? By knowing what's under the hood, we know it will never be in its current formulation with its use of large language modules and repeated requests. It won't ever be reliable and therefore 100% accurate or valid, particularly for norm atypical responses. How can we prove trust among people and institutions? And think about the relational thing. Like, how do we make sure that the students in the class know that I'm interested in what they're learning? And yeah, they might play with AI, but it may not be that helpful or may be helpful. But what is it that we're trying to get at here? What is the goal of why these assignments are here? Intentionally, what is a human AI balance? I absolutely love not teaching my students how to transcribe using a foot pedal. We now save an entire class and one entire assignment because they no longer have to do that. But those of you who remember transcription with a foot pedal are also grateful for Zoom transcription and other software transcriptions. So what's the human AI balance there, and how can we just move forward in this in a good way? I see some great a question coming up in the chat, great ones coming up in Mentimeter as well. And so I'll be finishing off with just some kind of details or evidence for what I'm saying, and then we'll go back into our conversation. So AI detection is not possible. It does not meet the probability standard, as I mentioned, and there's a great study talking more about that. AI compromises practice. So we're seeing actually in studies are showing, and this is not secondary, not higher education, but they're showing that exam results are declining as practice results increase because of the use of AI. So students use AI to practice, get their assignments in, come to the exam where they can't use AI, and they're actually not being able to do the learning. It is really good at improving things with feedback and perhaps using strategies that give just-in-time feedback for students. So maybe a practice conversation, being able to listen to something, being able to have it read out the text out loud, those things could help students. Same thing if you ask it to practice critical thinking, so correct human corrected output, tag team, ask for feedback, ask about common errors, go back and forth with the AI, ask about unknowns or biases that they see in someone's writing, or ask how it may be written across disciplines or audiences. So that curiosity it can be really helpful with. So there is a potential benefit to doing intentionally designed use of AI in humans, but we'll see. Like it does require some consideration there, and use of grading, using a source of a sample essay, using a sample communication rubric, being able to, and this is based on the value rubrics as well, running this through, being able to find a really rapid, not too badly for accuracy assessment. So we're pretty soon going to be seeing it come into grading. For quantitative, it's pretty but often inaccurate, particularly when it comes to things like significance. It likes to be liked, so it will tell you things are significant when they're not, for example. In addition to that, it often numbers don't always match. So I've been finding that like even though it runs analysis, I run it again myself in Excel or in SPSS, and I'm getting a different number. For qualitative analysis, we ran 1500 in about 1581, 83 intended outcomes through like a inductive process, and then I ran through a deductive process. For the deductive process, for one of the categories, it was 90% accurate. For some of the categories, it was 10% accurate on inter-rater reliability between AI and human. The thing is how norm typical the comments were. If it's plain language, highly tangible, more videos, acquire communication skills, general public level, typical responses, it did well. It really struggled with things like euphemisms and what I would call like, higher education speak. It didn't really understand those contexts and it was misattributing things. So when we think about it, make sure we're doing AI inter-rater reliability comparison. Make sure we're human coding at least a subset of the data to run as comparison. Because now I know for the acquire skills, which is a large section of the data, it can do that. For the rest of it, I would be a little bit more cautious. So always make sure to review is correct. The other one that I've seen emerging now is giving really detailed code books and instructions on what the files to refer to. and making sure to always include a please if it's not sure or no clear fit to put it under other, and then I manually will review all the others. But as someone who's been reviewing course evaluations since the day of handwritten course evals, it is great to see the possibility that all the comments of please make this more engaging or please have more videos might be something that is a little bit more rapidly analyzed, for example. When we think about qualitative, the comment about not being consistent, over and over again, I've ran this in Claude and you'll see it in Copilot as well. Taking a large document, asking it to thematically code it, ends up with different codes. Even using the same software twice on the same day, back to back, will get you different analyses with some alignment, but some non-alignment depending on the time I run it. So we're still seeing that huge variability, particularly in generic tools. Lastly, survey design, it will start mimicking, and bots are revolutionizing, particularly political surveys and customer feedback. It can actually mimic different personalities as well. It's good for testing surveys, not good for making sure you have accurate data that's out there. So if you're conducting a public survey where people can put in multiple responses, just be mindful to think about how you know if a human's completing it. One of the things that we looked at in our Mentimeter, evaluator is the main thing. We have some associate professors, accreditors, consultants, directors of assessment. Inputs include things like quantitative data, institutional data, text, surveys, student data, qualitative data that we've been talking about, literature as well, focus groups, just being mindful of how this comes together. And then, and also things like assignments, outcomes, alumni surveys, course evals, and all of those as well. With AI, again, it's pervasive, it's persuasive, it's pleasing, and it's promoted. So people are going to be using it. Let's just assume it. So we need to think about how they're doing it. And if we can make sure we're aligning it with the capabilities so it is more accurate when we do use it, and how we can improve trust and how we can be intentional about it. So I wanted to share with you some of the results that we're doing, and we're going to go into our discussion component now. And I see there's some comments and questions in the chat. So, and yeah, and I think what I'll do is, since I'm mostly experiential based, we'll stop the recording for those of you in YouTube. Thanks for joining us. Check out the next Higher Education TIG webinar and join us hopefully in person. Thank you.